Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you ever so much for attending what I hope will be an interesting webinar on understanding the ISO Triad, how quality, environment and health and safety work together. It is, initially when we look at it, when you're looking at it from brand new eyes, it looks so very, very daunting. And it's one of those things where, from somebody who's worked in the industry for a long time, for my sins, even now looking back, the idea of having a management system that had to be looked after, had to be worked on, used to, I'll be honest, it scared me. But what I've learned from my years in industry, but also from auditing, is that it's not quite as daunting as we think it's going to be. So what we're going to do today, we're going to look at the standard, we're going to look at the different clauses, we're going to see how they're the same, how they're similar, how they're not the same. But also it's that thing of just sort of understanding how we can get the systems to work together. It is difficult. It's not an easy job to do to start with, particularly if you're walking into a situation where they want you to do it from scratch. But also if you're working for a new company and they want you to revamp, you want to make changes, etc. Again, it's still a daunting task. All I ask of all of you that attend this, and it's very kind that you are, please leave questions till the end because it'll be a lot easier for me, because otherwise I'm going to get confused. But also, if possible, would you refer to the slide concerned, only so that I can go back to the slide and actually see, put into context the question that you're asking, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll be able to give you the answers that you want. Okay, so again, really, really appreciate that. So 9 times out of 10, most companies may have ISO 9001:2015 standard, or the old British standard, and I'll be honest with you, I can't remember the number, but it is what it is. But the idea is, you have one management system, you may not even got certification, but it's like, how do I put a system in place? Or if you've got a system, how do I expand it to include the environment? How do I expand it to include health and safety? And one of the biggest common question as an auditor we get is, particularly from a company that only has one standard, is how do the 3 main standards work together? How much time, and that's the writing of the documents, it's developing the documents, the procedures, the forms, the energy that you expend into doing the work, getting employee buy-in both in from senior management, plus also, most critically, the employees in the office, the factory or warehouse environment. There's the potential for added expenditure, etc. The easy option would be suggest training courses are completed for all. But the practicalities of running a company means that it's not always possible or practical or useful to pull everybody out of the workplace to do a 1-day training course on the management system. It doesn't work, because as much as you have a management system there to help you do the work that you want to do, to help you make the product, the process, to keep your customers and clients happy, if everybody has been taken out of the workspace, who's going to answer the telephone? Who's going to answer the email? So it's not always practical. So the idea is, with this webinar, you'll get the slides. You can then pick and choose what one. If you want to do training internally, just to give your own employees a rough idea of how the whole thing works, you've got notes there to sort of hopefully explain with some illustrations and possibly some really strange, weird, fun facts as well. I think they're fun, but I have a weird sense of humour. So it's, how do we get all 3 standards to work together? So can having all 3 be beneficial to a company? Yes, it can. The bottom line is, companies that supply into certain sectors, such as public infrastructure, so the railways, roadways, schools, hospitals, universities, even the utility companies, all of these companies that you apply to do work for have what they call a tender application. And one of the biggest questions on the tender application is, do you have ISO 9000? Yes or no? If yes, please send a copy of your certificate. If no, do you have a quality policy? Do you have various forms? Do you have various procedures? And the questionnaire, what may have only been 2 pages long, suddenly becomes 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pages long because you answered no. So there is that benefit. It can make things easier when it comes to doing the tender application, but it can also make things easier when dealing with external bodies. So if you have I'd put this as the, how do I put this ever so politely? Pleasure stroke pain of having to deal with either the HSE or the Environment Agency. Having an ISO certificate, particularly in either 14,001, which is the environment standard, or 45,001, which is the health and safety standard, it helps those 2 regulatory bodies understand that you are doing your best as a company to ensure that you create minimum harm to the environment, minimum harm to humans. You also have a good understanding of what the risks are to both your employees and the environment that they work in, plus also the greater global environment. And then it is, as I say, it's not that difficult to attain these. Even if you've got a system that hasn't been certified, as long as you've got the bones of a good system, we can get you through attaining ISO certification, because we as auditors want what's best for you. We want to help you get through that. We provide information. We do have a line that we can't cross, which means from auditor to consultant, but we can point you in the right direction, and if needs be, we can, how do I put this? We have associates that do consultancy work that we know of, and we can always provide information as to where to look to find these people. We can't tell you exactly who to use, we're not allowed to do that. We have to be impartial, like the Environment Agency, like the HSE, but we can provide guidance as to where to get that information, where to get that help. So the whole idea of this webinar is to literally, moving forward, provide you with an insight as to how to get your system together, so that from how it gets together, how it works, and hopefully by the end of it, you think, you know what, we can do this. This is possible. It's not going to be a problem. So we have this absolutely lovely, lovely. Oh, this is slide 3, by the way, just making people aware of this. I will point out slide numbers as we go through. So this is the bare bones of an ISO system. And if you look at the numbers on the screen, you've got internal issues and you've got brackets 4. Needs and expectations, brackets 4. That's clause 4 of the standard. And it's showing what feeds into your management system and what feeds out of it. So it's stuff that's going in, so it's the context of the organisation, what you're going to do, how you're going to do it. And then also you've got your support in there, you've got your leadership, your performance evaluation. We'll go through all of these as the webinar continues. So don't worry about thinking, I don't quite know what that means. She just skated over it. Don't worry about that. We look at that information as the webinar progresses. Okay, so please do not worry about this. So slide 4. This is an absolute cracking slide. This slide is actually going to be a separate document as an appendix to the slides that get sent to you. This is an NQA document that details the 3. It actually shows the 4 standards because it shows the energy standard. But what it does, if you look at the information at the top of the screen, you've got the PDCA cycle, plan, do, check, act, the basis of any management system. And what this table actually shows you is what clauses of the standard mean plan, what clauses of the standard mean do, what clauses of the standard mean check, what clauses of the standard mean act. And then if you look further down, as I say, please look at this when you get the pack through, because it'll be a lot easier to look at it versus on your computer screen at the moment. But it shows the title, all of the various sub clauses. But what you can see is how a lot of the clauses, the numbers and the titles are the same. And it will show literally how the PDCA cycle either is identically titled or veers slightly from the quality standard. So the quality line is right at the top, then below that is environment, health and safety, and then energy. So at this point, it's useful to understand how the use of words that can be used to mean the same thing or have completely different meanings. So I'm going to show you a slide. Apologies for the weirdness of it, but it's to try to explain something. Okay. If we look at slide 5, which is one of my personal favourites, I will be brutally honest, and you're all looking at that thinking, what in God's name are we actually looking at? So illustration A. This is a piece of equipment. The top one is what is known. The manufacturer is a company called Lerdiger. They're based in Germany. They make what is also known in businesses that do mixing as a ploughshare. But I've also heard it being referred to as a horizontal mixer. And the reason the name ploughshare was coined is because the paddles inside, if you look at the picture below, where you've got the red and the black, it mimics how a plough is used in the field. So it shows how if you look at when a farmer is ploughing the field, you can see how it mixes the soil, it aerates the soil. That's what a ploughshare does. It's the same as what a Lerdiger does. And the reason I've used this as an example, many years ago, I was asked about a piece of equipment where I worked, and I said, oh, how's the Lerdiger working? And I looked at them and I said, I'm ever so sorry, I don't actually know what you're talking about. And it was because they were using the manufacturer's name to describe the item. Everybody on the plant, including myself, used the description of it. So he was referring to it as a Lerdiger. We all refer to it as a ploughshare. So it's different words meaning the same thing. And with the standards, when we look at the various clauses as we go through this, you'll see that the words are slightly different, but the meanings are all the same. So what you think initially is, oh my good gosh, there's loads to do. When we break it down and we look at what the words mean, actually, you know what? It's not that bad. It works. And then illustration B, again, that's my personal favourite, die plates and extruders. Now, if you're in engineering, you know what a die plate is. You can push molten liquids through that, you can push plastics through that, and you get pieces like plastic cable, etc. But to people that aren't in engineering, they look at a die plate and think, well, I actually have no idea of that. Hence why the picture of the mincing machine below it. And with a mincing machine, it's literally pushing the meat using a ploughshare to actually chop the meat up and push it out as mince. So instead of it being lumps of steak or chicken breast, pork fillet or whatever, it comes out in a mince so that you can then make some, I'll be honest with you, make something like a lasagna or a shepherd's pie, using those as two brief examples where you use minced product. But these pieces of equipment can be used to make different things. So they can use to make mincemeat, clays, soaps. And these illustrations are just some examples of how different words in different industry sectors can be used to describe the same item or the same piece of equipment. I mean, I've got a food mixer in my kitchen. I've got the ability to mince product on it. The manufacturer of the equipment doesn't call it an extruder or a die plate, it just calls it a mincing machine. But because of my industry background, I look at it, die plate, extruder. It's literally how things are seen and how people translate what the words mean. So with the system, it is the use of words. So why was slide 5 included? Basically, my personal opinion is it's good to show clear illustrations to show that different words have the same meanings. From the viewpoint of the ISO standard and also the inclusion of Annex SL, there's been a concerted effort to bring the 3 main standards into a line of commonality, to try and illustrate to companies both big and small that the systems are linked and that if you're working within one standard, it's possible to work within the other 2 without having to completely redesign your management system. And that's one of the things that scares a lot of people when they look at the idea of integrating their management system. They look at it and think, oh my God, we've got so much work to do. I need to create a new policy. I need to create a new set of forms. I need to create this. I need to create that. The whole idea, as I said at the start of this, is to take a step back and look and work out, you know what, maybe we don't need to. So it is what it is. So let's go to slide 7. This is quite a bit of information. So slide 7 deals with clause 4, context of the organisation. Now, you've got 3 main areas in context of the organisation. You've got interested parties, internal, external issues, the scope of the management systems. Interested parties for all 3 standards will be the same, because your interested parties will be the employer, the company owner, the shareholders, the senior management team, the employees, the customers or clients, depending on how you describe them, your suppliers, your transport network if you're shipping product out, your regulatory authorities. Even if you work in an office-based environment, the HSE will still be interested if you have to report an accident or an incident to them under RIDDLE. So they're always going to be in the background. And if the accident is within a specialised sector, then they send industry experts to investigate. So if you were doing a health and safety management system and you were expanding it to, you had your quality system, you were expanding it to health and safety, so well, actually, you know what, we've touched on regulatory authorities, but we haven't actually detailed. So all you would do is add a couple of sentences in, just saying that the HSE are now officially an interested party. Because what happens is, particularly in certain industries, they send in industry experts to investigate. If not, they send in a standard inspector, because they have a number of those who will also visit and investigate. Again, the Environment Agency, this body is clearly more interested if the company holds a permit to operate, or it holds a waste carrier's licence, or it reports on waste packaging returns or ESOS. For sectors that aren't included under any of those, that don't come under a permitting requirement or any reporting requirement to the Environment Agency. The Environment Agency will get involved if fly tippings happened. They work with the local authority to work out if it is somebody has taken waste from a company and instead of taking it to a landfill site or a recycling point, dumped it on the side of the road. They look at the information, they go through the waste, etc., to see if there's a company name on any documents that's done. And this is usually as a result of either using a slightly less than reputable waste company, or if somebody disposes of company waste via their household waste. It is difficult and it's very hard to control, but that's when the Environment Agency will get involved with you if you're just an office-based environment. Other than that, unless you report to them, they're going to leave you alone. So yes, you can have them down as an interested party because you've got them, you have waste to get rid of, but they'll be on the lower level of interested parties. So you can grade who are the important ones. Again, you've addressed the risk. And then we have internal, external issues. Again, these are not really ISO specific in general. For example, every company wants to ensure continuity of supply, either of their services or their products or their suppliers. And these can be identified by using PESTLE. Now, PESTLE is a bit of a divisive tool. And apologies if you can hear in the background, there's somebody roaring a motorcycle past my house. There's not much I can do about that. So the PESTLE analysis is literally looking at what the company does through 6 viewpoints. Political. For example, at the moment, you've got current tensions in the Middle East. You've got the Houthi rebels attacking ships passing through the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, resulting in ships avoiding the Red Sea and taking a longer route to Europe and the UK. Not good. That puts a delay on your product. So from a quality perspective, it's delay in products arriving on site, arriving at port, arriving on site. But also, if your goods are booked on a ship to leave, say, Southampton to go to America, If the ship's late, it means if the ship is late docking in Southampton, it's going to be late leaving Southampton, which means it's going to be late leaving and arriving in America. So it can impact that from that perspective. So we look at pests that we tend to look really as a quality issue versus health and safety versus an environment, but it's just being aware of it. The second letter, E, stands for economic, and that means interest rates, inflation. All of these impact the pricing of services and goods for what the company does. Again, it's across the board. It's health and safety issues. It'll be how much health and safety equipment's costing. It could, prices could have gone up, meaning that, or availability low, so the price goes up. Also, exchange rates, particularly if things being bought from outside of the UK or even Europe. Then you've got S. S stands for social, and that's relationships really. That's the relationship with the customer, the suppliers, the neighbours, the employees. And it can invoke other additional policies that the company adheres to, such as information security, bribery and corruption. And from a environmental perspective, it's relationships with the neighbours, it's relationship with your suppliers and customers, because companies want to know how you're doing on your impact to the environment. Companies are starting to ask about carbon footprints. When you have health and safety thrown into the mix, they're asking about lost time accidents. So there's always this linkage. As much as it's not directly and completely health and safety or environment orientated, it works with all of it. And then you've got T, which stands for technology. How the company operates. If the manufacturing process is fully automated, or is it manual work? If it's manufacturing, is the process potentially messy, leaks, spills, emissions? Can the process be automated or part automated? For example, scheduling, loading of lorries, etc. And it's just working out what other things the company needs to be aware of and the processes that they do. It's like, well, actually, you know what? We have got lorries that are automatically loaded. We don't have to have somebody there. So from a safety perspective, we've got to proceed. We can write out how they load the lorry. We say the driver turns up, connects up to the point, he's then able to walk away. The control room, turn the pumps on, allow the lorry to be loaded. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Legal, this is the semi-biggie. It's not just environmental legislation and health and safety legislation. There's also other legislation that which is in relation to the ability to work within the UK, working hours, which is a minimum of 12 hours away from the workplace on a daily basis, crucial and critical when organising shift work, use of vehicles, plus there are also additional policies such as modern slavery and human trafficking policy available, particularly when certain commercial organisations must publish an annual statement detailing the steps that they take to prevent this in their business and their supply chains. And this is a requirement under Section 54 of the Modern Slavery Act 2015. So Modern Slavery Act doesn't really come under environmental, doesn't really come under health and safety, because there isn't really in 9000 a compliance clause. But we know that as a company, from a quality perspective, we have to be aware of this. So it's literally being able to say, actually, you know what, we're already looking at it from this perspective, we can now look at it from that perspective. Then finally, the last letter is E, which stands for environment. This can be related to requirements when a company requires an Environment Agency permit to operate, quite tedious, but also where a company, when building facilities, operating facilities, etc., are mindful of the locality that the operation is located in. For example, warehousing next to residential dwellings. As a classic example at the moment is where retail parks have moved away from retail and warehouse units and have sold the land with planning permission for redevelopment for housing. So you've then got houses being built next to warehouses that have the potential to be operational 24/7. And then after all of those thought processes going into everybody's brains, ISO reviewed the 9000 standard at the beginning of this year, and as of February 2024, as part of Clause 4, the company has to start looking at the impact of climate change. But this can be looked at from both a local, national, and also global viewpoint. of how the business can impact climate change, but also how the business can be affected by climate change. So it sounds quite onerous, but it is workable, it is doable, and if you've got ISO 14000 or 50 or 45000, that is really quite easy to do. But also, if you're thinking about doing them, when we go through, probably in the questions later, we will find out people's areas. So what we're looking at now is clause 8. It's not clause 8, sorry, clause 5. Having a moment, and this is slide 8. Do love the fact I get my numbers mixed up. Basically, it's policies. If you've got a single standard, you have a single policy. But if you've got more than one standard, you can either have separate policies, so have a separate quality policy to an environmental policy to a health and safety policy, or you can have an amalgamated one. And if you've got an amalgamated one, you only have to check it once. Whereas if you've got separate ones, you've got to check 3 of them every year. Potentially a bit of a no-brainer, my opinion, but that is only my opinion, I hasten to add. And what the standard wants is, regardless of the standard you're looking at, that all policies have to be established, implemented, developed and amended as the business changes, grows, and also with changing management structures. And then you also have to work out how they're going to be distributed, both internally and externally. Do you include it on your website? Is it available on request? Is there an automatic distribution list? Do you put it on notice boards in the workplace? It's the same for whatever standard you're looking at. Those requirements are the same for quality as they are for environmental, as they are for health and safety. And the same to a point, and this is where there is a bit of fun, and I use the word fun quite loosely, leadership commitment. This is always a bit tricky to assess from an auditor's perspective, depending on how available the senior management team are. Visual observations are excellent for this, and when on an industrial site, are the senior management team wearing the correct PPE? Or as it happened to me a good number of years ago, we had a visit from a member of the local health trust who wanted to see the site but wasn't prepared to wear PPE. He thought as a doctor he wasn't required to, and he thought he could get away wearing carrier bags on his feet instead of wearing a pair of steel-toe cap boots. Clearly, we did not let him on site. He'd been advised prior to the visit what he needed to bring and what we would supply. He didn't, so we left him in the boardroom and we pointed out of the boardroom window where everything was. It was a lot easier and it made us feel a lot safer as a company that we weren't having somebody walking around who wasn't wearing the correct PPE to be on site. Other indicators of good, clear leadership is the visual indicator that employees are willing to stop and chat with the site guide and the auditor versus employees keeping their heads down and avoiding you. The amount of times you go onto site and people will look at you, suddenly realise, oh, I don't know you, and walk off in a different direction looking incredibly busy. And then also, as I say, site walk rounds. If people are used to seeing the senior management team out on site, particularly this construction site, manufacturing site, people talk to them. You can see changes in behaviour. Whereas if they're not used to seeing those people out on site, you can tell that things aren't quite right. But as an auditor, you can only make a comment that leadership isn't particularly great. You can't say, oh, you need to go out. You really need to go out and talk to people all the time. We are not allowed to do that. And then one of my favourite slides, I will be honest with you, clause 6, slide 9, planning. Basically, fairly simple, regardless of it being ISO 9000, 14000 or 45000. You're looking at what you're doing is you're looking at a SWOT analysis, and basically with a SWOT analysis you are looking at the strengths of the company, the weaknesses of the company, the opportunities of the company and the threats to the company. And as an example, loss of employees due to retirement results in loss of skills from a quality perspective. It could take longer to process orders, resulting in delays in project orders. From a health and safety viewpoint, training of new staff on equipment increases potential for injury, which would then result in potential delays to orders being completed and shipped. And also, if it's a particularly bad injury, HSE investigations shutting the whole area down. Oh, hang on, wrong slide, do apologise. And then from the Environment Agency, if there's an environmental emission, again, these two bodies, the HSE and the Environment Agency, can stop a halt in production, particularly if something has spilled and it's reduced and it's gone on to site. And then you've got objectives. Now, these are the targets set by the company, the board, the shareholders, even the management team during meetings, including management review, internal and external audits, maintenance meetings, if you're in particular industry sectors, HAZOPs and hazards, plus also communications with external bodies. These provide the plan moving forward. And these can be discussed at management review, agreed at management review, and they can be things such as enabling you to set targets such as adherence to the quality of the product, emissions targets, so in other words, release of permitted gases to atmosphere within the permitted levels. We all know about NOx and particularly with impact to human health, but also NOx levels are monitored by the Environment Agency, not the HSE. So it's been able to literally do one thing to provide information for two bodies. And then there's lost time accidents. Using lost time and emission issues such as these can both impact the delivery and dispatch schedule of a project or product. And then slide 10, which is planning continued. This is also the section for all three standards that deal with what the company does regarding risk management. So if you recall earlier in the presentation, I spoke about the use of words, different phrases, all having the same meaning. Clause 6 is the best example of this. Change management or management of change. This is where the quality systems way of completing a risk assessment. Changes to the process can be requested by the customer, manufacturing team on the product being made, the research and development team, if the raw material is going to have to change, etc. Completing all those checks is literally a risk assessment, working out, if we make this change, will it affect how we operate? Will it affect the work that we produce? Environmental aspects. It's environmental risk assessment. Basically, it's the impact of the actions completed by the company on the local environment and also to a wider point, national and global environment. For example, constructing a new building on a site to be redeveloped. Is the footprint close to the previous building? Have you had to import materials? I mean, one of the things big in the City of London up until a couple of years ago was the importation of marble from China. And the problem with importation of marble from China is energy consumption in digging out the marble and also energy consumption in preparing the marble, emissions to air from the dust preparing that, but also that country's viewpoint and relationship with health and safety and environment. So again, it's that as much as we look at things, yeah, brilliant, but then we look at things like, yeah, maybe not quite so brilliant. And then from a health and safety perspective, it's quite simple in comparison. The risk of the task to be carried out, is it noisy? Will fumes be produced, e.g. world fume or working at height or use of electrical equipment? It works out quite simple. The understanding risk assessments from a health and safety perspective, easy. Understanding that environmental aspects is actually an environmental risk assessment. Once you know that it is, makes it a lot easier. And the same with management of change and change management. Once you understand it's a risk assessment from a quality perspective, actually, you know what? They're all just risk assessments. We're just looking at from a different angle. So if you can do a risk assessment for change management, you can do a risk assessment for the environment, you can do a risk assessment for health and safety. You might need a bit more information and a bit more understanding regarding the product, the process, but it's all doable. Suddenly it doesn't seem quite so complicated. And then compliance. This is the other one that's quite fun and games, I'll be brutally honest. From an environmental perspective and a health and safety perspective, it's fairly clear. From a QA perspective, it's not quite so clear cut. The reason being in 14 and 45,000, there is a clause, sub-clause for compliance. For the quality process, the quality standard, there isn't. But all companies will hold both public and employee liability insurance. The terms and conditions may detail that certain tasks are to be completed or adhered to, e.g. forklift licenses. And if you read up on the HSE website, if an employee uses the machine every day, then there's no requirement to renew the licence. However, the T's and C's insurance policy may detail that it has to be renewed every 3 to 5 years. It's understanding what's in those documents. And if you're a global company or even a national company, the best qualified and most experienced person for a role may not reside in the UK. You may have to, and when I say that, you're looking at other legislation such as leave to remain and right to work. The HR department would have to ensure that all employment legislation was adhered to enable that person to commence employment. Or if you're a company that has got an arm in a different country, such as America, it's making sure they've got all the documentation in place, the right visas for working out there, and that if it's a short-term visa, they're out there for that period of time, they're not out there any longer. Because if they're out there for too long, they can get into trouble, and it's not good. So now on to slide 11. Support. Very simple, very easy, and almost identical for every department, every sector, every every standard. Resources. Providing guidance to ensure that the company concerned have the necessary resources to manage the management system. And yes, I know it sounds a bit mixed up, but resources are where the company ensures they have the ability to meet the requirements to manage the system. This can range from employees holding first aid qualifications, forklift licence, crane and banks person training, NEBOSH qualifications in occupational health and safety, environmental management, and also managers that have both management experience and qualifications, or the correct equipment to complete the task. Computers connected to the company networks, and yeah, I know it sounds strange mentioning that one, but it was only about 15 years ago that companies started to invest in full network systems that were company-wide, not just site-wide. Plus also suitable buildings that are fit for purpose, ensuring that you've got all the utilities supplied to site, but no power cuts, no water blockages, that sort of thing. Competence, same across the board. For both employees and contractors and subcontractors, is ensuring that they're qualified and experienced to complete the task asked of them. For example, if you contracted an electrician to rewire your home, you would check to make sure they either had their ECS card, their City and Guilds electrical 18th edition electrical qualifications, as if there was a failure in the work, your insurance company wouldn't pay out in the event of the claim. So again, it's that linking with competence to compliance. There are always links within the system. Awareness, very simple. It's quite simply ensuring that all employees have a good knowledge of the management system. If they need to use forms, why do they? Are any targets set can include production targets, failure targets, but most importantly of all, if there is a separate or integrated policy available, because if they know that there's a policy, they know there's a system. And then the best one, communication. This is for both internal and external parties, ensuring that within the company there are good methods of communication, good use of notice boards, minutes for meetings, and externally communication is recorded, especially responses, as this will tie in with clause 9, customer satisfaction and complaints. So again, you've got that linkage between the different parts of the standard. And then documented information. This I'll be honest, a bit boring from my perspective, but hey ho. If you have a documented management system, you have steps in place to prevent loss of documents, in other words, backups to either the cloud or dedicated offsite server. However, it's up to the company to determine what needs to be documented, what needs to be recorded, and the retention period. However, there are some documents that companies will have which mean that there are legal timespans in place. For example, accounts is 7 years. Waste transfer notes is 2 years. Documents required for reporting to the Environment Agency, if you've got a permit, is 5 years. Health surveillance, depending on what is being monitored, 50 years or longer. And it's quite difficult if you're not quite sure what is going on with the company, particularly with older companies that shut sites or close down. Clause 8 on slide 12. We are getting there. Apologies if it feels like it's dragging. It's just there's so much information. You've got, for 9001, you have got 7 sub-clauses. And to put it quite simply, what you're doing is you're looking at what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, what you're going to provide, what your customer requirements are, review it. So that's 1 and 2. Design is looking at the product that you're going to supply, how are you going to produce it, how are you going to check it, how much are you going to produce, how long will it take, and what raw materials do you need. Control of, oh dear, apologies, sensitive mouse. And then you've got control of externally provided processes, products and services. In layman's terms, it's approved suppliers, and it's how do you choose a supplier? Is it the cost, the quality of the product, the availability of the product, the lifespan of the product? Does this product come with a certificate of conformity? If it's a chemical or a liquid product, a certificate of analysis. If it's equipment, calibration certificates. And then if you're hiring contractors to do work, competency documents, copies of their accreditation, certificates, trade memberships. That all comes under control of externally provided products and services, processes and services. Very simple. And then you've got 8.5, production and service provision. That is literally, you know what you're producing or the service you're providing. How do you control it? Can you trace it? Has the customer supplied you with raw material, also known as toll manufacturing? Have you stored it separately? Do you keep it clearly labelled? Do you retain samples just in case? 8.6, release of products and services. That's agreeing that something's ready to be dispatched. Very simple. And then 8.7, control of non-conforming products. What do you do if the product or design doesn't meet the customer's specification or the raw materials don't pass incoming inspection tests? It's the use of quarantine areas, it's the ability to trace product when it comes in, if it's not right, that it's gone back, that sort of thing. And as an example, many years ago, Revlon in South Wales until 2001, so a very long time ago, they had a factory shop. It sold what was known as factory seconds. The product met the specifications, it was just that the packaging wasn't quite right. In other words, the print on a packet, on a tube of hand cream wasn't straight, therefore it was factory seconds. So it was done, they would sell it like that so that instead of destroying or landfilling it, they sold the product, so they tried to reduce the waste. Slide 13, clause 8. This is where 9,000 is different to 14 and 45. So we'll look at 14,001 first. 8.1 is very brief. It describes how the company and addresses how the company will address any environmental impact in relation to the standard, and also the life cycle perspective of the product manufactured, its construction and the equipment purchased. However, with 45,001, the health and safety standard, it's more in depth because it looks at how to meet the requirements of the standard, and it's the elimination of hazards and reducing any occupational health and safety risks. This is the equivalent of design clause 8.3 in ISO 9001. Management of change is also detailed, and again, that comes under 8.3 in 9001, so there is a linkage. And at this point, if changes do have to be made, and an example of it is where we've all possibly seen, and again I show my age, programs such as CSI and other American crime shows that laboratory equipment will test a sample in a few minutes. However, in real life, it will take up to an hour. But to get an agreement to change how long it will take to run the sample, you have to do various tests, record all the information, and get agreement with your customer to change the details, and that is part of design. And it's and 8.2 for health and safety and environment is exactly the same. It's emergency preparedness and response. This can begin as a fire plan with drills and alarm testing, or from an environmental perspective, a spill drill, which can develop into an encompassing emergency plan that details all items on sites, lists of flammable products, maps, drawings, layouts, identifying where items are stored. And then the next stage of this is basically, which is more visible in a quality system, is a business continuity plan, which will detail potential scenarios, provide details and guidance as to how the company will resume business, methods of communications, lists of contacts and numbers, etc. It all works, and it's
you can see how it links into clause 8 of 9,000, but not quite. So this is the only clause that is the same but different, which sounds a bit bonkers, but it unfortunately is. But when a company is determining the risks of manufacturing a product or working in an office space to create a product that is all on computer design, you still go through all the various clauses. You'll still look at how do we do this? What's the market for it? Can we do this? And to a point, that's what 8,000 does. It's also what 14,000 does, but it's from a slightly environmental perspective, and the same with health and safety from the 45 viewpoint. And then we have clause 9, which is on slide 14. Performance evaluation. And this quite possibly, in my opinion, is the most easily integrated clause of all three standards. Internal audits does exactly what it says on the tin, in that you've done what was expected. And the requirements for internal audits are the same across all three standards. Management review is the same across all three standards. The only difference is you include changes to legislation and also any environmental or health and safety accidents or incidences that have been reported to the Environment Agency or HSE. And as with all three standards, any changes to the level of risk the company faces from a HSEQ viewpoint, which is health, safety, environment and quality. Customer satisfaction, predominantly from a quality perspective, but can also be related to complaints from local residents complaining about trees, noise, dust, parking, etc. Or from employees about working conditions. Drivers, if the company manages a fleet of lorries and they have the "How am I driving" sticker on the back of their truck, or the company's name, which means if somebody sees it, they can phone up and complain. And then monitoring and measuring. This is where there is a slight difference, but they all look at the same thing. So from a health and safety perspective, it's the measuring of lost time accidents, incidences, it's health surveillance, especially in relation to companies where employees can be exposed to various things such as weld fume, silica dust, or a product that has the potential to create skin sensitivity. From an environmental perspective, it's the monitoring of waste generated, including the types, the cost of disposal, any emissions to air, including air conditioning units, calibration of emissions monitoring equipment. And then from a quality perspective, it's the manufacturing, it's the in-process testing, calibration of equipment. And that includes maintenance of equipment as well. So forklift truck servicing, lifting equipment inspections, office-based environment, it will be meter readings, air conditioning units. And if computer design is part of the process, then design checklists and simulations are completed to ensure that the design does not need to be changed. So fairly, across the board, fairly easy and works well together. Slide 15, and we're almost done, honestly people, honestly. Improvement, which is clause 10. The standard details that the organisation shall determine and select opportunities for improvement and implement these as necessary actions to meet customer requirements to enhance customer satisfaction, thus improving the performance and effectiveness of the quality management system. That's your objectives that you discussed in clause 6 in planning. It's how they link up. And then the other things that it requires, that you've then got incident, non-conformity and corrective action. These are the same for all three standards with the exception of incident. Non-conformity and corrective actions can be as a result of internal audits, external audits, customer product complaints, but inquiries, complaints in general. And it can also be if employee behaviour outside of the workplace, particularly if they're wearing a uniform and their behaviour isn't becoming of a person representing the company, so in other words, being rowdy behaviour in a public place. The NCR's non-conformity reports and the resulting corrective actions detail how the company will plan to resolve it. And incidents can relate to either an accident or a near-miss investigation from both a health and safety viewpoint and an environmental. What they want to know is, why did it happen? How did it happen? As all of this may be requested if the accident or incident is investigated by the Health and Safety Executive, the Environment Agency or the insurance company. And then finally, you've got continued improvement. And what they want there is that the organisation shall continuously
continually improve the suitability, adequacy and effectiveness of the quality management system by internal audits, external audits, inspections, drills, etc. So what they're saying is you've got a plan, you've enacted it, you've reviewed it, and you've made changes to it. And then you go back to the start again, so it's the PDCA cycle all the way through. And then in conclusion, so finally finished folks, do apologise. Let's move something off of my screen, that's it. ISO 9001 2015, ISO 14001 2015 and ISO 45001 2018 have more in common than initially thought. When I first started looking at this, and I started my journey on auditing, I thought, oh, they're all completely different. But as a result of the inclusion of Annex SL, I determined that there was actually a lot more in common than I initially thought. And one of the things is the demystifying of the terminology used in the standards illustrates how different words can all have the same meaning. And I think the thing is, the one thing I hope you all take away from this is that if you're not sure of what the word means, look it up, but sometimes look at the pictures of words, because that might give you a different explanation as to what that word means. And then you've got the integrating of 2 or 3 of these standards. It's not an impossible task. Initially, it will feel like it, but this can be done through the use of internal steering groups, discussing with employees at all levels and understanding the risks to both within the company's processes and then also the impact to both the employer and the employee. And then when formulating the management system, rule of thumb has always been to have a form, you need a procedure. Yes, this is true. But sometimes it's easier to design a form to gather the data and information, and then once you're confident with what you're looking for, you can then create a procedure. But in the way in which the standards are now interpreted with the use of Annex SL, you don't need a procedure, but you may need a form, which makes life a lot easier. And then as the NQA, we are as much as we are a certification body, we also provide training courses. So I've gone through the boring bit of the webinar, so hopefully you haven't all fallen asleep. I really do hope that. And we do lots of different courses. We do e-learning, we do introductory courses, we do implementation courses. We also do courses on integrated management. So in other words, it's integrate why an ISO 9000 will work with the 14,000 and the 45,000, or even if environment will work with energy. Information security, slightly different, slightly more niche market, and the same with medical devices. Business continuity works with quality, it works with environment, it works with health and safety, it can be part of the integrated system. Aerospace will probably work very well with information security, and again, could be a integrated system. So we have lots of training there, and we have e-learnings like the lecture, it feels like that I've given you the webinar, virtual training plus in-house courses that can suit you or your organisation. And we can also do, with some of the lead auditors, we can either do separate standards or all 3 standards. So there is stuff that we can do. And then for further support, we've got lots of ways of getting in contact with us. You've got the website, you've got our email address with info@nqa.com. We have various blogs that our auditors write, myself included, various experiences in both our current work life to a point, but predominantly in our previous work lives, companies that we worked for, different tasks, situations, etc., that we've signed up with and been exposed to. We also offer a free e-zine, which is released once a month, which has useful updates, information to support you, but also provides, with NQA in touch, any changes. It provides guidance on legislation changes, so it can be really, really helpful. And to sign up to that, it's just literally visit the NQA website, /sign up. So very, very easy. So at this point in time, I'd just like to say thank you all ever so much for attending. I really do hope you enjoyed it or found it at least informative. And if any of you have got any questions, I will endeavour to answer them straight away. But if not, we'll depend on how my colleague Charles has received the information. We will either do it here and now, or it will come back to you in an email. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Claire, for the webinar. We have one question so far from Debbie. It's about risk assessments. I believe it's slide 9/10, I think clause 6.
Yep.
The question is it okay to amalgamate all risks into one register to aid efficiency as there is so much overlap?
Yes. To be honest, I as an auditor, an amalgamated system like that is perfect. Having them all together, because there are so many bits and pieces where if you try to separate it out into different areas, so this stuff is directly health and safety, this stuff is directly environmental, this stuff is directly quality, because of how if it's manufacturing, how your system works, it's all going to be, it's going to get mixed up. It's going to get confusing for people reading it. So detailing it as one register, and you can always say predominantly greatest risk is from a quality perspective. You can then put secondary risk from a health and safety perspective. And I will be brutally honest, as much as my field prior to working for NQA was environment can be third on the list as the order of preference, not preference, priority. But no, I personally, I do prefer an all-encompassing risk assessment. It makes life a lot easier because you can usually then put extra information in that makes it easy reading for yourselves, but your employees, but also for any external people like myself that would come and audit you. I think, personally, I think that works really well, but that's my opinion.
Perfect. Thank you, Claire. I hope that was a really good answer. And Debbie, if that answers your question, let us know when you can. But we haven't got any more questions currently, but we can always wait here for the next couple of minutes for anyone of the remaining attendees to answer any questions or ask any questions.
Yeah, sure. Brilliant. I just hope I didn't send too many people to sleep.
No, I don't think you did, Claire. You were great. Don't worry about that. But yeah, but we'll wait for the next couple of minutes for any more questions to come through. No questions yet, but we'll wait a couple of minutes for any more last questions before we end the webinar.
Yep, sure, no problem.
Oh, we have one question. Yes, so it's from Sarah. So she says, thanks for the webinar. Regarding the recent amendment to 9001 to 2015 to consider the environment, what is the best approach for this amendment?
Right, if I were to put ignore my auditor hat, but put my business hat on, one of the things that I get why it was put in, I get why it was addressed in the standard because of everything, the move towards net zero and 2050 and also carbon neutrality. I thought it is something that companies should start addressing, but I know that it's in the industry, as in the ISO industry, it caused a lot of questions and a lot of concern because people that only had 9,000, it's like, well, how, that's an environmental issue, it's not a health and safety issue, it's not a quality issue, why do I need to worry about it? I look at it when I'm auditing, depending on the nature of the business that I'm auditing, I look at what's the local impact from climate change, what's the national impact from climate change, what's the global viewpoint. I always do global last, and I'll explain why. Local, in the UK, we have had in the past 9 months now, because we're now in June, from October through to the end of April, beginning of May, we had excessive rainfall, more than what we've had for years. And where I live down on the south coast, you've had areas that have been flooded for months. Where I live in Dorset, there were fields that were floodplains where the River Stour had burst its banks. But with excessive rainfall can come road closure. And from a quality perspective, that's going to impact product getting to site or product coming away from site. So as much as it's not climate change in the broad spectrum that everybody understands climate change, it's localised, it's national, because our road infrastructure in certain parts of the country isn't so much perilous, but it's single lane carriageway, whereas other parts of the country are very lucky and have dual carriageway and motorway. And if a road is closed, there are lots of alternative routes to get there. But there are certain parts of the country where if a road is closed due to landslip, flooding, areas can get cut off. And if we look at how rainfall has been, using that as the example, that's how it affects the quality. Because you as a company will pride yourself on ensuring that your product gets to your customer at a particular time if it's going out by road. And if you're based on the Isle of Wight, if the weather conditions are that bad, particularly with the increased number of storms that we've been having, ferries get cancelled. That will then affect delivery onto the island. It will also affect delivery off of the island. And to a point, from an electronic perspective, if there is excessive rainfall and storms, etc., pylons go down, power shortages. Companies may have backup generators or they may not. If they have a backup generator, how many hours will it last for? So it's looking at it from not so much an environmental perspective, it's looking at actually how does it impact our business? If we have excessive rainfall and the roads are shut, can we get our stuff off site? Can we get stuff delivered to us? If you're looking at, if you're just an office-based environment, if there's power cuts, power surges, or we don't have enough power, as we were having issues, particularly with the threat, well, I say threat, what was going on still going on in Ukraine and the sanctions against Russia, and companies were being paid to not use energy. That's an environmental thing, but it also stops the company from operating properly. So again, that is climate change, because we don't have enough suitable infrastructure in the UK to be supplied solely by wind power or solar power or water power. We're still reliant to a point on gas. So that's where the climate change bit is. And it's just looking at how it would, just look at it from, how do I put this? How the small things that affect you, not the big things. Don't look at the big global picture, look at the small things, because from any company's perspective, their main concern from their customers is making sure they're able to meet their customers' requirements. They get their product to their customer on time and try not to send it via Royal Mail. Sorry, that's my own personal opinion. Things get delayed. Hopefully that answers your question, Sarah.
Hopefully it does. We do have one more question from Natalie. Yes, Sarah says excellent, thank you. So thank you very much for that, Claire. But one more question from Natalie. It can be straightforward to identify 14,001 and 45,001 in the relevant legislation, but how can you clearly identify 9,001 within a piece of legislation? She's asking this within the context of, I think of using it within a legal register.
Oh God, yes. No, I totally get that. It is so difficult. This is why, to a point, they've never put compliance in ISO 9000, because it is exceptionally complex. The only thing I would do, I mean, as an employee of NQA, we use the company that produces legal registers, and we can amend ours that way, which works for us. But as a company on the outside, it is difficult. I think what you have to do is sign up to the government website, and that will detail legislation that's coming out. Also, more importantly, if you sign up to NQA in Touch, that tells you about legislation as well, because they email you every month and they detail all legislation changes every month. Not that we've got a lot at the moment, because we're in silly season, or PERDA as they call it, but NQA actually, as part of our services, we do that, so that does help. But it is difficult from a quality perspective. It's where, if you've got a HR department, the HR department should have people that have got not just experience in HR, but have got HR management experience, because doing those courses will provide them with guidance as to what legislation. I don't know if I've answered your question. I'm going to be brutally honest, Natalie, and I am sorry if I haven't, but I've done my best.
No worries. Yeah, we'll wait for Natalie to respond there. But there's no more questions so far. But perhaps, oh, Natalie says thank you very much. So you clearly, hopefully, you have answered the question. We'll wait for maybe 1 more minute for any final questions, and you might leave it at that.
Yeah.
Perfect. I think we might leave it there, Claire. No more questions coming through. But Claire, thank you very much for your time today for delivering the webinar.
No problem at all, Charles. Thank you so much for asking me. Really appreciate it.
Perfect. And yeah, and we'll end it off there. But thank you very much, everyone, for attending. If you have any questions, let us know. We'll be more than happy to answer by email. And we'll be sending out the slides to everyone, all the attendees as well, so you can have a look through all the different slides and points and ask any questions or have any queries. But thank you very much for your time today.